What's up everyone? Welcome to my Whirlwind The Devil's Guide for the Season 6 and the new expansion, Vessel of Hatred. In this guide we're gonna cover both the leveling and the endgame version of the build. We'll also cover the Mythic Endgame version of the build, slightly, but don't worry, down the line, in a couple of days, I'll make a full in-depth guide for the Mythic version. Since it needs a lot more time to explain everything, and by then, you'll probably start getting your mythics and makes more sense to make it then because I can give you more information and I'll know a lot more as well. One thing I do want to point out is that you can play this build without having the Vessel of Hatred expansion. Not only because this is not the Spiritborn, of course, but because you don't really need the runes to make this build work. They are nice, they are a slight boost to the build, maybe 10%. If you want to be a bit generous, maybe 20%, but the build works completely fine without it. It does not break in any single way, so don't worry about it. So now let's actually get into the build guide, shall we? Starting off with the overall view of the build, there's a couple of things I want to cover here before we get into the leveling version. First of all, this build is a bit different than you're used to in the Season 4 and Season 5 because our main damage is not going to be the Death Devils. This aspect got super nerfed. Basically, the bug allowed it to do 3 to 4 times more damage, so right now it's a lot weaker. So what we're doing is we're going to be scaling Devilish, right? This is going to be our main source of damage. And to do it, there's a couple of things we're gonna do. First, we're gonna take advantage of Enhanced Whirlwind, which already get by default, so we know. But we're gonna be trying to maximizing it as much as we can. One of the ways to do it is to get attack speed. By getting attack speed, you hit more often, so you proc this more often. Another way is to actually get a lot of resource generation. To that end, we're gonna try to get as much uptime as we can on Rolling Cry, and in the endgame version, especially on the Mythic setup, we're gonna have 100% uptime on this shout, and all the others, mind you. So, to actually stack the attack speed, we'll also be using Rupture, that's the reason it's here, right? Not only does it give you 40% attack speed, by just using it, will also help you proc things like this, or a chance to restore primary resource. Since with a lot of attack speeds, we're gonna be proccing, I think it's up towards 2 lucky hits per second. And not only that, we're gonna also be using slacking, which is another, easy resource early on. One thing I want to point out is that you cannot stack a lot of lucky hit chance on the weapons. You can, but the only thing it does is it increases the primary resource you get. It doesn't increase the chance is always going to be 15%, but instead of 36 you get 72. Early on you might run like the 2 of your weapons with this. Later on, when you start stacking a lot of Max Fury, you don't have to do it, because this is going to give you more than 100, which instantly proc Devilish. Correct? One other thing, Rupture also is guaranteed to overpower, which is going to be nice for reasons we're going to cover later on the build. And just to be safe, you got Iron Skin here, because early on, you're going to be a bit squishy. Now, let's actually get into the 2 versions of the build that we're going to cover today, and a bit of the Mythic setup, shall we? Oh yeah, one thing I would also like to point out, for clarity's sake, the video that you're watching in the background, I didn't have a lot of time to play on PTR that does not have Ramaladnis nor Locrans, and it still cleared an 80 quite easily. So just to give you an idea on how much more powerful the build can be. I didn't have time to play, I just got the Ubers that were basically free, and whatever legendary gear I could use. Now, for the leveling guide, first of all, when it comes to the skill tree, you can mostly follow this. Make sure to prioritize the skills, and if you can't go on to the next node, just start getting the passives around it. It's fine. Regarding the attack speed, in this version of the build, we're gonna get whatever we can from the from the bucket of the items. Mind you, attack speed has 2 buckets that you need to fill. Both have 100% max for a total of 200% max attack speed. To do this, on the gear is one of the buckets, mostly on the gear. You can also get it from other sources, but the first bucket comes mostly from the gear, and the second bucket comes from aspects like accelerating, which is giving us 60%, and skills like rupture, that's giving us 40%, for a total of 100 here. Mind you, I want to point this out, for accelerating to properly work, you need to proc it and restart the Whirlwind, because for some reason they couldn't get this right. What can you do, right? In this version of the build, you will not have 100% uptime on your war cries, on the war cry, brawling cry. You're not gonna have 100% of time on shouts, which is fine. Just make sure to stagger them, so you always are benefiting from vocalizing power. Your iron skin is there to keep you alive in cases you need it, and to also proc things like the Iron Warrior, right? This will help you stay alive a lot early on. Other aspects here are also benefiting your defenses. One thing I want to point out, the reason a lot of your armor does not have three affixes, it's because the third affix is not really that important here. You mostly want just strength and max life, because the other ones would have to be a resist or armor, and for the penitent level of danger, it's more than enough. As you can see, your resist cap and armor cap, right? So it's not really, you don't need to worry about it. The reason I'm not going over penitent is because before level 60 you cannot go into torments, so there's no use there. Besides that, you'll be using the 200 axe expertise as you use anywhere else. So with that out of the way, I think that's enough for the leveling build. Let's go on to endgame, shall we? Now, going on to endgame. One of the biggest differences you're gonna see here is that we are running Ramaladness. In this version of the build, we're gonna start stacking Max Fury, both for Ramaladness and for Locrons. This is gonna be the biggest boost we're gonna have for damage in this build, so make sure you get them. One thing here, Locrons, you don't need to get like a perfect 0.4, you can get 0.35 and it's fine. Early on, you're not going to be able to cap your crit chance, even with 35, but it's fine, don't worry too much about it. Right now, what you want to worry about is getting the build functional. One of the biggest differences you're going to see in the tree is that we are swapping the swiftness we had before for the Tempered Fury, because it's a bit of extra damage, and we are double dipping on it. We go from Aladness and Locust, correct? Another thing are the other uniques we're going to be using. One of them, Rage of Argath. This is going to help us have almost 100% uptime on our shouts. It's going to make things so much easier. Believe me, it's amazing. The other one, of course, Tibalt's Will. I don't think there's anything to explain here. If you're running Ramaladnings and Locust Talisman, there's no way you're not running Tibalt, right? It's really good, especially in combination with those two other units. The other one that might be a bit of a red herring for some people is Ragnarok Wave. While last season I was using them for the cooldown, most of the reason I'm using them right now, it's because of that resist. When you start getting onto Torment 4 early on, you're gonna be hurting for a lot of resists and armor. So the way I went around that, just using Ragnarok Way. You get cooldown, which is nice. You get movement speed, which is nice. Non-physical damage is not gonna do much for you, but it is what it is. In the effect, it's gonna be some nice extra damage, nothing to talk home about. But that resist more than makes up for it, right? It just makes the build so much easier to gear for. Here we start getting the runes as well. We're going to be running the movements, like moving gives you the resource thing, which will also proc your cooldowns here. And on the other one, we're going to be running the one that when you cast a skill with cooldown, which you should cast somewhat often, it will give you primary resource, which will funnel into Devilish proccing more often, correct? One of the things you can notice is that we also have Outburst here. The reason we are running this is because, going over onto the Paragon board, we are running this glyph here, Revenge. So, you know, might as well try to make use of it. We will not get, mind you, will not get full stacks on bosses. It is what it is, they are just slow. But the reason we are running this glyph is for something funny here as well. Oh, didn't mean to do that. This node here, and all the other damage duelists around it, will convert to Max Fury. It's not yet here in the Max Roll Planner, but you can check it on the patch notes. It's there. So, if this, you know, follows the usual 16 Max Fury from a rare and 4 from the other ones, with this glyph that boosts by 100% and eventually 415% all rare nodes, just from this table alone, you're gonna get 95 Max Fury. This is how you're gonna start getting upwards of the 500 Max Fury. It's quite nice and it's quite insane. Early on, it's not gonna give a lot, you need to level it, but I didn't think in this version of the build I should even be using the 50 points ones. I'm just using the 21 ones because it's more realistic, as well as only using 225 points for the Paragon board. Another thing that's worth mentioning here is that we're going to be using Warbringer to, you know, get our Fortify. The attack speed on Whirlwind also scales the cost of it. So it starts off at 25 with 200% attack speed. We're going to be getting over to 75 quite easily. So you're going to be proccing this basically every second. So don't worry too much about it. We've also got the Blood Rage, which doesn't need explanation, and Decimator. This time around, Decimator is much easier to proc, again because you are running Rupture. Now, the only other thing I think it's worth to actually mention about this build is that we're swapping the Iron Skin, we're swapping it over for Call of the Ancients. The reason we're doing it, it's because Call of the Ancients not only gives you 20% damage, it also gives you 20% free attack speed. And with Ragnarok and all of the shouts, it should be up most of the time. You can snapshot the attack speed anyway, so as long as you don't stop spinning, you still will have the 20% attack speed. And since we are getting 20% attack speed here, I decided to swap around, better yet, swap around the accelerating or the stable so you can get a bit more damage while not losing that much attack speed. I think this is going to be best, but those are exchangeable if you prefer. Right? Make sure to also take notice of the jewels we're running on our amulets and rings. Those are going to be important because, again, you're going to be hurting for your resists and your armor. I went a bit overboard here just to be safe because you're never going to get perfect rolls on your gear. Another thing to point out, make sure you have your dust level size close to 100 or 100 if you can. It's really important. The chance to cast twice, it's going to be easy, don't worry too much about it. Right? Now let's go into the Mythics so you have an idea of what's coming ahead, shall we? So, here we are on the Mythic. I'm just going to give a quick rundown, right? We're going to be using Harlequin, Hero's Might, Starless Skies, and Grandfather. Mind you, you only need this for Strip. You don't need Grandfather to swap into this build, but it's a big damage difference once you actually get it. Now, when it comes to the skill tree, it's gonna stay most of the same. You don't need to worry about it. Quite easy. And the Paragon, right? Here you can see I added 266 points here. That's 41 more points than you had on the endgame version of the build. I'll eventually add more versions with a bit more points and a bit less, so you know how to actually scale up the Paragon board. But for now, I'm leaving it here because the Paragon is going to be changed a bit once the new update hits. So no use going super in depth here. One thing I want to point out is that in this guide, I'm considering that you are running Ancestrals. If you're running Ancestrals, you should have access to GAs. And some of them are really important, like getting cooldown on Shaco is quite important, getting attack speed on your Rig of Starless Sky is quite important. Grandfather, the resource, is nice to get, and on Uriel's Might, you want to get that 14.6 on your max resists, and then you spend everything else on damage reduction. So there's one of two ways for you to do this. Either you get the GA on max resists, and you just dump your Masterworks all into damage reduction, or you get the GA on damage reduction, and you dump 2 points into max resists and 1 into damage reduction. You're not gonna get the full 15, but that should be more than fine because you also have the incense after that, so don't worry too much about it. We will also be running Warcry boots because they are big damage, but that's the biggest difference, don't worry too much about it. The only other thing worth mentioning is we need to get 1 point on each of the Masterworks to chance to cast Dust Devils twice. You need 2 on Strength and 2 on it, because together they're gonna go over to 102, chance to cast twice. It's a bit over, but it's only 2%, you're not wasting almost anything here, don't worry too much about it. Now, first of all, if you made it here, thanks for watching. I hope you actually enjoyed the build. I had really fun doing it. I actually had this prepared since season 4, the end of season 4, because I thought they would fix the thing into season 5. They didn't, so we got to have some fun on season 5, but now here we are, right? One thing I want to point out is that this build will likely not outcompete Diablo for Barbarian, or maybe some of the new tech that's coming around. I'll be making some videos on them as well. For now, I can't say anything for sure, but yeah, hopefully you had fun. You're gonna have fun with the build, and if you do, make sure to come back, leave me a like, and maybe subscribe for more Barbarian content, and hopefully more Spiritborn as well once I get my hands on it. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.